So we had last week gone through this little look at the tendency we have to think bigger is better. And it flows into many areas of our culture. It's why we have the big box store. We just assume that's better. It's why, if you track it through the last 100 years or so, you see the average square footage of a newly built American house by decade grows by 200, 300, 500 square feet every decade. I look at I look at the house in which her grandparents raised 4 children. It's about half the size of the house that I live in. And my house here is actually downsized from what we had when we were in Texas. But it just has, it's going. Now I think actually lately it's topped off a little bit, maybe gone down a little bit. People have reacted somewhat, but for a long period of time, 50, 60, 70 years, every decade or so, you're looking at bigger homes, bigger homes, bigger homes. It used to be if you had a place to cook, a place to sit around in the evening, and a place to go to bed, you're pretty much good. Now you need all kinds of room for other things. But bigger is better. It's kind of been the thought.
Since Henry Ford and the cars is, economies to scale. I mean, the railroads are economies to scale. You move stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
The ship that hit the bridge, it's economies to scale. I mean, everything in our society is set up like, I remember realtors became became national. They figured they'd get they'd get an advantage if they were a national chain instead of just a local guy. So everybody expects that the wave of the future will be,
bigger.
Find some,
Bigger, right? It's not really a new phenomenon. What king ever thought his kingdom should get smaller? Right. What farmer ever wanted less land? It's just kind of how things generally go. But it has really gotten into our own culture that way, and we see it then also creeping into the church that bigger must be better, and so we live in this era of mega churches. When I was growing up, I don't think I don't believe I ever really heard of something like that, a mega church. Not only the term, but that one congregation would have thousands of people going to it. I lived in a mid-sized Midwestern city, but I didn't know anything of that kind of thing. The closest thing we probably had in town were some of the Catholic churches. Tended to be pretty large in scale compared to most of the others. There was 3 Catholic churches serving all the Roman Catholics in my community versus the, couple dozen Lutheran churches that were much smaller but spread over and probably almost equal in population. You added them together. And then you had a smattering of others. It's upper Midwest, not down here. So Baptist was actually relatively rare. Remember when a Baptist person moved into our neighborhood, and we got along with them fine and all, but that was weird for Minnesota. They were just getting there, right? A Southern Baptist, you know where you are? Anyway, so of course now here I am, a Wisconsin Synod Lutheran, and Oklahoma, right? Do you know where you are? All right. So, we kind of talked about this a little bit last time and tracked that not only through our culture, but through what's gone on in the church as well. These last questions is where we left off, and we hadn't really had a chance to discuss them. So I just thought I'd throw them out today as a matter of introducing the next section, but for a few moments, something for you to chew on. Are there advantages in smaller things, and specifically smaller churches?
Yes.
Anything come to mind in particular?
Well, I know everybody here.
Okay. No. I think the theme song for the old TV series Cheers. It was popular not only because it was a catchy tune, but where everybody knows your name, right? And the people are all the same. You want to be where you can see the troubles are all the same. You want to go where everybody knows your name, right? So there was something to that idea of, and there's been comparisons throughout time also of bars to churches, because often there are some similar cultural things going on, and you probably know bartenders I don't know if they get compared to being pastors so much, but often as some amateur psychologists, right? The counselor. You can sit at the bar and have your drinks and share all your problems with him, and he'll give you some advice perhaps, and it's like going to the pastor's office in some ways. So, okay, so there's that kind of a family feel when you've got a something smaller in a church, and in some other institutions or organizations also.
Well, this is Oklahoma, so
Okay.
so there's a push factor that people come to Oklahoma, or at least stay in Oklahoma, because it's not Dallas. Okay? Okay? I mean,
Alright.
it could be, I'm not saying it is and I'll deny it, but it could be that Texas and Oklahoma are similar in some ways,
They are.
but not in that way. Dallas, that county is bigger than all population than all of Oklahoma, and
That's right.
people don't go there, or they come for that because that's why we're here. If we really loved the sin of the big
hustle
city,
and bustle.
hustle and bustle, and the fact that the turnover of cash and jobs was just enormous, we'd be there. We wouldn't be here. So what's left? We're the people that like small stuff.
Right.
I was gonna say, and it kind of depends on who you are, because like we have a son that wants to have a bigger church so he can come in and not be noticed and then leave. They don't want to be involved and everybody see him and look at him. It kind of depends on.
We cannot provide anonymity here.
No.
Just not gonna happen, right? Other things.
Anonymous.
A smaller parish can react more nimbly
Okay.
to situations.
Sometimes it gets compared to a ship and a boat. A big ocean liner takes a long time to get it to turn. And of course, if the power goes out, then it hits the bridge and brings it down. But a little boat, a little speedboat, can zip here and there, and so there's an ability sometimes to adjust to changes and situations a little bit more quickly. You can get the news out to people more quickly, so there is sometimes some advantage to that kind of thing. In professional sports, in football, for example, the debate goes on. Do you want the biggest guy, or do you want the fastest guy? Best wide receiver in the NFL is arguably Tyreek Hill, who's about this tall, and he's not gonna push anybody over, not anybody. But you're going to have to catch up to him because he's faster than all of them, right? So he's small
hard
and
to
fast,
catch
and away he goes.
Small mammals are hard to catch. Our puppies are like
Okay.
They're all over. I mean, I just can't catch it. They're just way faster than I am. They have to be
What is the whole
lured.
theme today?
Yeah, and there's of course that's kind of a bell curve kind of thing.
Yeah.
Of course, elephants are probably hard to catch too, but
But once you get there, what do you do?
Well,
You
right,
kill.
right.
That's
Right.
you salt to death. There's not much choice there.
okay.
Financially, Pastor, it's financially, I mean, it's less to run our little church, as Joel Osteen was put out.
Yeah, and that can be kind of okay. So there's
Have to be picking.
there's a two sides on many of these issues. The other thing is the bigger membership base you have supporting, the more income you likely have to be able to do that. Of course, the bigger membership base you're trying to serve that are supporting this, a lot of times the number of programs and things you want to have get ahead of that income also. But at least in terms of keeping the doors open and basic operations, smaller, easier to support. How many of you thought we'd be here at this point in history? How many of you thought that we, Grace Lutheran, would be here at this point in history? Maybe some of you thought we'd still be here in 2019 when the Synod said no more money. The math at the time said we had a year and a half. So we should have gone out, summer of 2020 should have been it. Here we are, 2024. And but part of that is that our small size and some of the nimbleness allows us to keep going, right? Part of it.
I mean, the word is, a small face-to-face community is kind of the, for better or worse, I mean, there are small villages that are the worst place on earth to be because of the factions and everybody hates one another, but but that's the draw for many of us is community, a sense of,
All right. But there is a movement today towards house churches, little congregations that really don't intend ever to grow much beyond what can meet in someone's living room. And if they get a few more people, they will encourage them to go start their own house church. We had this debate when I lived in Dallas. Calvary Lutheran Church in Dallas, Texas, where I was from, about 500 in membership today, runs a large school, and by WELL standards, it's reasonably large. By the world standards, it's still a small church practically. Although actually, when they talk about averages, it does get into the large church category. That number is much lower than you might think for a large church category. But we would debate at times, should we be simply trying to build the population of our local congregation so much, or especially because of the nature of confessional Lutheranism in this part of the world, should we be more interested in getting the next mission church started in the next suburb and grow by dividing, right? So and in its history, that congregation has started at least 5 or 6 congregations in its history. Recognizing it, and if it hadn't done that, the general WELS population in the Dallas area would be much smaller. So it continued to, it's planted in DeSoto, Texas, Duncanville, Texas, Fort Worth area, Flower Mound, Plano, Garland, to some degree way out in East Texas and Scroggins. That's a Calvary daughter, and now its daughters are daughtering, so it's got grandkids. The church I serve there now, there's a church in Rockwall, which is the daughter of the church in Garland, which is the daughter of Calvary. There's a church new starting in northern Collin County, Prosper area, halfway to the Red River. And that is a daughter of the congregation in Plano, which is a daughter of Calvary. So it's got grandkids going now. Anyway. But philosophically, should we try to become should we try to compete with Watermark Community Church down the road in our neighborhood? Should we try to compete with Schofield Bible Church down the road in our community with thousands of members and a youth group with a youth group is the size of our congregation, and the things that you can do with that kind of a youth group? Is that what we should be shooting for? Or should we be content to be a comparatively smaller congregation? It's got a school, albeit. And less program, but starting a mission here, starting a mission there, starting a mission there. Is that and they've been back and forth. If you talk to the early members, they were really proud of their mission starting. And there was a period of time in which they thought, we keep spreading ourselves too thin. And every time you start a mission, you're skimming the cream. And eventually what you got left is skim milk, right? You don't start a mission with the people who never come to church. You start a mission with your councilmen and your Sunday school teachers and the folks that are heavily invested. And when we started the church in Garland, I gave up my youth group leader, my financial secretary, my treasurer, the head of my board of elders, and the head of my evangelism committee. I mean, we just basically said goodbye to the council. Said, all right, God bless you. Now, the thing is that God has a tendency to replace those folks. Okay, so you don't just skim the cream. But if humanly speaking anyway, you're looking to balance that a little bit so that you don't get yourself into some trouble in the home church, some other congregation as you do that. And then we started to have debates. Well, are we doing too much of this too fast? Do we need to be more concerned about the integrity and health of our local institution here before we're going to start all these others? There's no solution. It's just something you always have to keep a finger on.
I have to admit that when Pastor Strockman talked about starting a mission church, I thought, what is he thinking? And yet here we are.
Yeah. And there's some comfort for the larger church to have this other group, this other thing, right? To fellowship with and to know, that there's something else going on. So,
But
anyway.
WELS churches are not as isolated atoms as some other other types of churches.
Well, the fact was, any church that belongs to a denomination still has the advantage of a closer knit fellowship to be a part of, right? So I can go to a pastor's conference with people who have my same training. I went to school with many of them. We've been acculturated together in many ways, and I know that I'm not alone, right? When we go to circuit meetings, the same kind of thing. Whereas a lot of times with some guy who's really just moves into the area, hangs out a shingle, starts preaching, and pretty soon he's gathered some people around him, but he can be kind of alone. Can be. All right. Is it necessarily a virtue for a church to be small?
The Ku Klux Klan can be small.
Right.
The Ku Klux Klan could be.
So are we shooting at small?
No.
No. Right? It's the nature of God's kingdom that we want to bring new souls in. And that bothers people sometimes. I again, when I was in a bigger congregation, we haven't got to that point here yet. But people would sometimes complain about the fact that we had 2 services, and I don't know anybody at the second service or at the first service, and we just don't know each other like we used to, and we don't have this kind of cheers, everybody knows my name feel any longer, and it doesn't have this kind of family feel. And sometimes I just feel like I'm going to this institution, like I'm going to the mall or shopping someplace. I don't have that same connection that I had when we were smaller. And I can remember guys waxing somewhat longingly about the time when there was the big water main break at church, and in the middle of a big rainstorm, and they are sloshing through the water at 2 a.m. all together, 5 or 10 guys. And what a great time of camaraderie, and how it brought them all together, kind of thing.
And they really want to do that again?
I was gonna say, what is wrong with that?
So, but they recognize that in that you can't just call up maintenance and tell them to get down there, right? You had to just chip in, and you did it together, and you had that kind of, you went through the battles together, and then as we grew, there was. If something like that happened, well, this little group here might be involved, but probably, maintenance chairman is calling whoever you're contracted to come in and get it fixed. That sort of thing. That when they were smaller, and they didn't just hire somebody to re-roof the parsonage, but they actually got the men all together, case of beer, nails, shingles, put on the new shingles. And it was that bonding that kind of took place.
Well, when I was at Holy Cross, I had my friends there, like this one and that one over there. But I didn't know everybody. Some people I didn't even know their name.
Yeah, and it's not that big.
Talking about getting together, we had a problem at St. John where the plumbing gave way. Got a call from pastor about 10 o'clock, and we were there till about 2 o'clock in the morning, and then we had to go to church the next day at 9 o'clock.
Well, when the story I was telling you was a Saturday night, right? So
Yeah.
they literally had to haul all of the pews out of the sanctuary and put them in the fellowship hall and set up worship in the fellowship hall because it was just a mess. The carpet was wet, and some of the drywall was gooey, and it was a big problem.
We had a shower for pastor's wife for her baby coming, so we lifted tables from the main fellowship hall, the church fellowship hall, over to the church area to get all the tables over, all the decorations on the table for the next day. But we had people, that other leaders came in and got all that.
All right, well, summing this up, the point is there are some advantages to being small sometimes. However, it's not our goal. Right? It's not our goal to remain that way. It is our goal to add new people and to continue to add new people. But don't let that give the congregation as a whole kind of an inferiority complex when we look at Life Church, Victory Church, and some of the old historic churches downtown, First Baptist or First Christian that are, although I think First Christian in particular probably is a little bit on the ropes at this point in time. Essay, just a little side, I'm writing an essay for our convention down in Dallas and doing a little research on where American churches are headed. Disciples of Christ denomination, 1950, population 2 million. 2024 population 278,000.
Wow.
The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, founding in 1988, 5.9 million. If current trajectories for their membership continue till 2050, there will be a church body of 60,000,
Ow.
worshiping with about 16,000 nationwide on a Sunday, if trajectories don't change. And they've been on that trajectory for a long time. Anyway, the evangelicals are doing better than those old main lines, but they're not growing overall. Individual congregations you can spot that grow, but as a group, shrinking. They are currently estimated to be 22 million out of 330 million Americans, and by 2035, 2040, they're estimated to go from 22 million to 16.
Churchgoers, who's the?
Evangelical members of they can be broadly considered evangelical. So
All evangelical.
that would but that end number would place them at about 1/25th of the population of the United States. Anyway, all right. The running dog, a running dog with tin cans tied to the tail. What? That's the name of the section. Small towns, small churches, maintaining your anonymity. Story of Joe Jernigan Shamrock. So if you read the book, he tells the story of a guy who was kind of a hard-scrabble guy in the town where he grew up, and already in his high school years was pretty much well on his way and through into alcoholism. Everybody just felt he was trouble. His mother was kind of the one person who stood behind him and prayed for him, finally got him to go to treatment, and he came through on the other side, a new man. I believe it was in prison, got involved in prison ministry, was baptized, came out fully giving his life to Christ, goes back to hometown and starts preaching. But of course he had kind of a reputation in town. So he starts going to the people who were like him. And to this day, now he's a man like in his 70s. And he's gathered, not a huge congregation, but there are people who kind of come from that side of things. And, it's not a church that anybody's going to hear. It's not Willow Creek Community Church, Bill Hybels up in Chicago area. It's not Rick Warren out in California with his big mega church out there. It's not Joel Osteen in Houston, Texas with Lakewood down there. Just a little church, but certainly has had a big impact on that community and shows that a person who's not the star celebrity pastor in a congregation that is not the kind of church that gets wide accolades or is very well known, still has a big impact on the people with whom it comes into contact. Downsides of living or worshiping in a place where everybody knows you. I think somebody picked that up here a little bit, but what are some of the downsides of if everybody knows you?
I grew up in a town of 11,000 people, and I couldn't make a move without somebody reporting it to my mother, good or bad.
Yeah. Why is it that no prophet is accepted in his hometown, as Jesus said?
They know you.
They know you. Right? Who are you to tell us? We remember when you did this, and we remember when you did this, and we remember when you did this. And that's not, it's not that the prophets God sends are supposed to base their message or their authority on the fact that they have lived such a moral superior life as though they were speaking from an ivory tower all the time. In my sermons, I have to kind of balance the idea that on the one hand, I am a sinner just like you, and if I really wanted to get specific, I could probably scandalize you all. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But so I have to kind of tread this. So I don't want to give the impression that I speak from an ivory tower, and I don't have these problems that you have. But on the other hand, I don't want to lose my biblical concept of blamelessness that becomes such a scandalous life that why would anybody listen to this guy? And that's something of a narrow road to try to travel down. But it's why I probably couldn't take a call back, at the very least, to my home congregation, Resurrection Lutheran Church in Rochester, Minnesota. I maybe could go to one of its daughter congregations in town where nobody would know my name so much anymore. They might be vaguely aware of my parents, but they have had other people in and out, and there I could serve. But Resurrection itself, it'd be, there's a group about this size that still needs to die off before they're ready for me. And by the time that happens, I'm looking at retirement coming pretty quickly anyway, right? But so for the individual too. So a downside, of course, everybody knows everybody's business.
Well, just
Go
to
ahead.
chime in, I mean, my grandmother grew up in a small town in southern Oklahoma that shall not be named. But I mean, her father was a notorious alcoholic. He made a lot of money, but everybody knew him. I met people 40 years later that could recall an incident, somebody I'd never met, and they can remember him. And so they were both teetotal. My grandmother and my grandfather were teetotaling Baptists, and they had their entire lives were sort of trying to live down this legacy of the previous generation.
Yeah.
In a small town, and she went to teach at the Indian school in the Dakotas, or moved to other places, moved temporarily to a house in Colorado. She said once, if somebody is really your friend after 30 or 40 years in a small town, then they're really your friend, so.
Okay.
So that was, and I think my whole family was just sort of like, bit their thumb at this small town. And, I think there might have been a lot of really good things about that place and a good place to raise children, but not if you had that reputation.
You have to try to overcome.
Right.
It might not even be your own reputation, but you've been plastered with it because the
Right.
people came before you. Sometimes if people have had older brothers and sisters who went to a school.
Right.
And one way that can cut both ways, right? So the oldest member of the family was some kind of genius, and you're just kind of middling that way. And then they have these high expectations, and they kind of look down on you because you're not living up to it. And on the other side, if you had an older sibling who was kind of hellion, and you get there, you're not getting a chance because they figure from the get-go that there is something wrong with you.
Yeah.
That happens at prep school,
It happens everywhere.
when you send the kids to school.
My grandfather got sick and had a stroke, and she moved to Oklahoma City to take better care of him. And she finally found, in the midst of bridge clubs after bridge club after bridge club, I think she finally made friends with somebody.
She found her place.
She found her place.
Yeah.
And she went to the Baptist church up there, with good, she lived there until the funeral was held there. So, anyway.
Yeah. So, we've kind of talked through this one a little bit, I guess, but then, so what are the advantages on the other side? Well,
Support.
yeah, I think in a small group like that where people actually know each other, where you've actually developed relationships, there is this tendency then to be more Johnny on the spot when there's a need. It's better known. It may be, if there's an issue in a family or person's life that needs help, you don't necessarily have to even, let's say, call the minister. The news has spread just through the organic and natural connections that are there, and people often take good care of each other. If you're in some of these larger churches, and one of the things that the really big mega churches find is that they have to find a way to be small, in the sense that you create these small group ministries within the congregation so that at least, if not everybody knows everybody, because that's impossible with 5,000 people, you've got these groups of a dozen or 20 who do know each other pretty well and kind of function like a small congregation in the congregation, and look out after each other in a various number of ways. And sometimes those small groups then can be somewhat, they take on the features, the attributes of both sides of that, in that they can be something of a hassle to try to shepherd along because the people know each other so well and they get into each other's business in ways they shouldn't. But on the other hand, they do often develop these close-knit relationships where they are looking out for each other, and they'll bring the casserole when there's been a death in the family, and they're they're watching out for each other. So there are definitely advantages as well. Which of the following are necessary in a faithful church? Great music.
I love it, but
Yeah. Is there anything wrong with it?
no.
No. Biblical preaching.
Yes.
Yeah, you kind of have to have that. Now, biblical preaching. The level of rhetorical talent, while desirable, is not the same thing as just being biblical. You know what I'm saying?
No.
No.
Not every speaker is fascinating, right?
Right?
Every speaker probably thinks he is, but not everyone is. And there is a certain amount of toleration. So you can go to the really fascinating preacher here who's slipping poison in his sermons on a regular basis. And the fact that he's fascinating to listen to makes that poison that much easier to swallow and harder to discern. And then you can have the kind of dry speaker over here who just isn't very exciting. As one of my homiletics professors once said, as he was commenting on people in our own church body who are preachers, he said, "Have these men never loved?" It's just like there's no passion there. Do you care about anything, right? It's blah, 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 blah. That's exactly how one of the elders in the congregation where I vicar described my first sermons.
Oh dear.
He said, by the end of the year, he said, if you wanted to be the pastor here, that would be okay. I wouldn't mind listening to you at all. But when you first got here and you stood up in that pulpit in your first sermons, it was like you were, and this is exactly the way Paul Heine described my sermons to me, and Paul is a dear guy because he's the kind of guy who will do this and gets away with it, right? So you were just sitting there, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know, maybe you still think that's what's going on. That's possible. But don't tell me. I could take it from Paul Heine. On the other side of that, I had to chastise him for a little salty language it was a church council. A couple meetings in a row, and the congregational president finally pulled me aside. He said, "Somebody's got to put a stop to this." So I put a stop to it, and then he didn't even say anything. He just got up and left. And he came back to my office the next day, and he said, "Vicar, I apologize. You were completely right, and I'm wrong, and I'm sorry, and I'm going to work on this." And he says, "You have to understand, I've reached an age," and he was probably about my age, maybe a little bit younger, 55, 60, somewhere in there. He says, "I was at my doctor last week, and he's 20 years younger than me, and he's telling me, stop doing this and stop doing this and stop doing this." And then I was at some other professional, my dentist or whoever it was, and stop doing this and stop doing this and stop doing this. And then this kid who's not even out of school, who's a vicar, is, stop doing this. And it's like, I was just
Over it.
We all get there. Okay, but biblical preaching is important, right? And it's one of the professors that I had in school said that sometimes if the delivery isn't just fascinating, you just have to listen harder. We had one of the professors at Northwestern College when I attended who everybody dreaded when he had his turn for chapel. And the dean of students one day was complaining about how bad it was going out of church one day. And Paul Eichmann, who was my Hebrew professor, is the most evangelical man who's ever been a Wisconsin Synod member. Just the kindest man you can possibly imagine. Turned to the dean and said, sometimes you just have to listen harder. Message centered on the cross?
Yes.
Okay, so, I can give you biblical sermons that have no grace in them. And a lot of people wouldn't even perceive that that's an issue. Because it's biblical. Every word he said is from Scripture. But if there's no grace, there is nothing for your faith to feed on. And eventually, over time, people start to wise up to that, but by that time, they're almost dead. Right? They've just been beaten down by this law message. Often the law dressed up to be your friend. Right? Five useful tips for raising your children, or 4 ways to be a better spouse, or three basic biblical principles for succeeding in your career. And you can take them all right out of Scripture, and you probably see the self-help Christian books on the shelf at some bookstores by the big name authors that peddle that kind of stuff. But if there's no gospel, there is actually not anything that builds faith. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, not just the word. The gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. The law saves no one. All it does is prepare you for the gospel. It is the plow that has to go in the ground before you plant the seed. But you can plow a field until you have ground up that soil into the finest particles possible. But if you never plant seed, I guarantee you, you'll never get anything. Or if you get anything, it'll just be the weeds that were already there. The seed is in grace, right? We are the Wisconsin, know what the next word is? Evangelical, which in its proper sense doesn't mean American Calvinist or Arminian. In its proper sense, it means gospel, good news based, right? There's a reason that's in their church's name. A great youth or seniors program. A lot of people go looking for that. Is it wrong?
No.
Is it useful?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not the basis. And if you're all old people, you don't need a youth program. You need to go find some youth and then start one after that, but you don't need a youth program. And if you're all young people, I haven't seen. I think I've maybe told you when I was in Dallas, we had the LW, Lutheran Women's Missionary Society, which is a great program still, but the Lutheran Women's Missionary Society had become kind of the old ladies' Bible class that met some midweek morning. It was scheduled midweek morning, so you can guess who could come.
People who don't work.
People who are retired for the most part. Well, it got to the point where it was the pastor and Nellie Ergeson. And we love Nellie, but we can go to her house and see her anytime. We don't have to have her come in for a formal Bible class, right? It just wasn't, it didn't fit our congregation's ministry at that point in time. A welcoming atmosphere to all types of people.
Yeah.
If you're going to do the gospel work, you kind of need that, right? And okay, we can all nod our heads like this, but is this easy or hard?
Hard.
Well, it's really hard. We're getting, as time goes, as our culture drifts further, we get a little bit more comfortable, perhaps, just by the nature of where the culture's gone and where we go as we chase it. I remember in Dallas when the tattooed lady showed up for the first time. And if you talk to her, every tattoo had a meaning. But her entire body, she never took her clothes off, but I'm pretty sure it was like her entire body told the story of her life in pictures. Now, I'm still from that generation where we were scolded for drawing on ourselves with markers in kindergarten and that kind of thing, and I've never been tempted to do so since. But was she a soul that needed to be saved? Yeah. And she came back, and she took the Bible information class, and she joined the congregation, so now we're stuck with her.
Brought 2 kids with her.
Brought a couple kids with her.
Yeah. Sat
It was
right
a
in front
blessing.
of the
Well, absolutely.
Built the
That's my
church.
point. That's my point.
Right.
So, but what I'm saying is that at first, of course, everybody thinks you got to get used to that a little bit. Right? And if we're really about saving sinners, don't expect them to be sanctified when they arrive.
Yeah.
And so, if you've got people who, from dress, behavior, whatever, obviously have got some things out of sync with the Bible faith in their lives from the moment they walk in your door and sit down, you can't just show them a door again. Now, we don't want to just leave them where they're at either, right? That's the other error you fall into. You just accommodate. You don't confront the culture where it needs to be confronted. But this is where they need to be. And on we could go. But it's not always, I think you guys have been pretty good, but we've had homeless people coming here from time to time. Read the book of James about the congregation that has the rich man come into the congregation, and the members say, oh, nice gold ring. Hey, here's a nice seat for you. Don't forget to remember us when the offering plate comes by. And then you have the man who's poor and comes in rags, and you sit here by my feet. We're not even going to give you a chair. So it's not a new problem for Christians. Christianity has kind of historically been, serious religious involvement has kind of historically meant a middle class to upper class kind of thing. It's often neglected the poor in terms of really having them in and on board. And that is not to our credit. A welcoming atmosphere to people of all types. And then it goes the other way too. If you had somebody who, I don't know, if you had the guy come in who's obviously, I don't know, maybe you hear the rap music in his car before he shuts it off and comes in the door, and he's wearing chains and gold teeth and stereotypical things that needs to be saved just like the rest of us, right? Go say hi.
Well, I think like the Pilgrims or the Massachusetts Bay stuff, I mean, the saints would sit in the front and have little foot warmers, and then the poor would sit at the very back, and they'd have to stand and stuff. But also, I think before the first 200 or 300 years of the church, they were the poor and they weren't, if they were middle class, I mean, that meant they were they made things or made tents or something, but they weren't wealthy and they weren't well looked at. I mean, they were they were at the fringe. They were kind of
Yes.
at the edge for the first 200, 300 years. So.
Well, regarding our size, 2 Bible passages and then we wrap this up. Revelation 3. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these are the words of him who's holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. And that's kind of the key passage in this letter to the church in Philadelphia. It's one of the few that he has no criticisms of those 7 churches in Revelations chapters 2 and 3. You have little strength. You're not a great big group, but you've kept my word, and you've not denied my name. And I've created an open door for your ministry and work. I will make those who are the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they're not, but are liars, I'll make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. So God is promising, I'm going to defend you. The world will know that my love is on you, despite the fact that you have a little strength. Since you've kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that's going to come upon the whole world to test those who live on the earth. So, not to say that we can necessarily extrapolate that to ourselves. He's talking about a specific trial at that time. Big or small groups of believers may certainly face the same kinds of persecutions and trials that come to God's people. It's part of the deal. I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. Him who overcomes, I'll make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will he leave it. I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on him my new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So God only has gospel promises, right? That eventually, the city, I'll write the name of my God, the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem. These are basically heavenly promises. Your church is leading you where it needs to go, and you will certainly receive these things. And not because you're a big church, not because you're a powerful church, not because you have the respect of all the world around you, but because you have faithfully held to my name and my word. And Jesus says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Is he wrong? No. So if he is right, what does that tell you about our mission?
It's lots of work.
It's lots of work, and don't be shocked when the numbers aren't huge. Only a few find it. He's not kidding. He's not kidding, right? I think we talked earlier lesson, but there are those who think size of church is an indication of the approval of God. Now, that church may or may not have God's approval based on the way it teaches God's word. But the numbers say nothing about that one way or the other. The size of the church is not an indication by virtue merely of the numbers of people there, because there's a lot of false reasons to be sitting in those chairs. Only a few find it. Get used to small, but don't become content with it. Right? There's a. What matters is not the size of the audience, but the fidelity of the message. All right. Pick up the next section next week.